Welcome to PipeGen Live. So in this series, what we do is we get guests on who I'll introduce you guys to here in a second. The focus really is around generating pipelines. So everything from cold emailing to cold calling, self-sourcing pipeline as an account executive, how to build outbound programs. We sort of cover all of those topics. And today is going to be really specific around helping account executives self-source. Uh, we're going to go over some data here in a second, but the industry, whether SaaS or some of the other professional services that you guys might be selling, with the economy being the way that it is right now, a lot of reps are having to self-source pipeline and reduce reliance on SDRs and marketing. We're going to get into how to do that. So before we do that, this is what today is going to look like. I'm going to have a couple minutes where I'm going to share some data and just state of self-sourcing. Yes, John, and for everyone else, this call will be recorded. We're going to get into a panel. So we got three awesome guests with very different variety of experience between the three. So we're going to have an interesting panel, and then we're going to have a one-on-one interview portion towards the end. So before we dig into this, I want to thank Magical and Zoom Info. If anyone here relates to having to copy and paste templates like outside of email, so like LinkedIn, texting, etc., Magical, I love that tool. I use it to manage all of my LinkedIn messaging and keep all of my templates in one place. It's pretty badass. And Zoom Info, I don't know that I really need to say much else about Zoom Info besides it sort of does everything, and you should check it out if you're not using it.
Woo!
And if you're not calling cell phone numbers, what are you doing? It's 2024. So before we dig in, the way today is going to work is I'm going to speak to some of the data here that I see on the screen, and I'm also going to have some polls that we would love to have you interact with so that we can learn a little bit more about you. And I'm going to pull one of those up as we're doing this. So the data that you see on the screen here, this is from SalesLoft. What they did is they looked at a study of around 100, 150 top performers across some of their biggest clients. And what they found, so what you're seeing there in green, the light green, is what a top performer will self-source and pipeline based on their average sales price below. So you can see top performing account executives will typically self-source 36 to 61% of their pipeline. And that's my first question I want to ask you guys. I just launched a poll. How much of your pipeline do you self-source? And if you're an SDR maybe watching this, think about how much your account executives need to self-source. Is it none of your pipeline? Is it all? Is it somewhere in between? We'll let this one go here for a couple of seconds and we'll share the results. So what percentage of your pipeline do you self-source? Take a couple seconds here, answer us in the poll, and then we'll share it out and we'll have some good, kind of talking points. All right, I'm gonna end the poll here and share. I don't know, anyone here? It's a surprise. Any of you guys? Mitch, Caitlyn, Elmer? How many people need to self-source 100% of pipeline? It's much higher actually than I thought it would be.
Yeah, I'm surprised to
100%.
see that all. Yeah.
Thought we were the unicorn. Ben's been acting like we're crazy because we do it all. So yeah, I was surprised to see 26%.
Yeah, let me know in the chat how many of you here are like SDRs marketing. We ain't got none of that. I got to go get my own pipeline. Let me know in the chat.
Y'all better be
So,
getting paid for 100% self-sourcing.
so let's dig into the panel, you guys. So what I want to do here is quickly introduce everyone, and then we're going to sort of cut straight to the chase and get you guys as much kind of tactical content as possible. Caitlyn McCrimmon, I have here. Caitlyn and I have worked together. She's great sales leader, great at building really good culture. I've reposted your guys' job posts several times, Caitlin. So like one of the few sales cultures, and happen to work with a lot of great clients, but one of the sales cultures where I'm like, yeah, you should definitely work for a company like that. She's VP of Revenue at Transact. Mitch Thomas is Director of Sales Enablement at Brooksource, another previous client of mine. One unique thing that we're going to dig into later today is they have a close to 200 account executives and no SDRs. So when we talk AE self-sourcing, that's just how they do it. They haven't done it any other way. Elmer Lopez is mid-market account manager at Zoom Info. was President's Club in 2023 at Zoom Info. He's an account manager working mid-market accounts now as well. So you three, glad to have you on the show. Are you ready to dig in?
Let's go.
Okay. So as we're doing this, everyone, if you got questions, there's a Q&A button here in the bottom. Feel free to drop them in. We want to answer as many questions as we can. Cynthia had asked, what do you mean by self-source? So self-source would be as an account executive, meetings that I have to go set through my own outbound efforts versus an SDR setting it up for me or an inbound lead maybe coming in and being assigned to me. So that's self-sourcing. Let us know if you guys have any questions in the Q&A and in the chat. We'll try to keep up with this as much as possible. So I wanted to talk first, Mitch, I thought it'd be good to start with you here. Culture and creating buy-in is something that is a really big part of self-sourcing. Do you want to kind of walk through, like you guys are bringing in sales reps and like this is just the expectation that they self-source. There's no like, hey, you're going to have an SDR that helps. We're going to have tons of inbound leads going for you. Like there's just an outbound culture. Can you speak to and give background if necessary on BrookSource? But how do you guys think about the culture piece of self-sourcing and getting AEs to really take ownership over their pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, I think to start out, just background, like we do benefit from, that's the way we've always done it, like startup mentality. It was just a scrappy self-sourcing culture. That's the way we've done it. And then as we evolved and grew, it had to change quite a bit. But I don't know, the things that stick out just culture-wise that I think are relevant for this are, it's a big coaching culture. So I think that's an important piece of this, and then accountability. And I really look at those two things and kind of how they play off each other. You have to have, in my opinion, some sort of accountability system to be able to pull this off and make sure you're able to still accelerate and grow. But if you're going to hold people accountable, you got to be, right hand as well and be able to get in the trenches and coach them. So for us, the coaching culture, the accountability, and kind of those working off each other has been kind of what's helped us do that.
Can you give us an example of what you mean by coaching culture?
Yeah, I mean, we just how we're structured even. Like we have a lot of coaches per reps, or our coaches don't support, 15, 20 reps. Like we have a lot of coaches available. We have different specialists. We have in roles who are going to be your industry specialists or your technology specialists because we're in tech and engineering sales. So it's that, and it's just a big priority. I think it's coaching to activities. I think a lot of companies obviously focus a lot on pipeline and coaching outcomes, but I think the coaching to activities and really being able to get in the weeds with people on the actual job, the function they're doing, that's a huge focus for us. And I think that kind of goes back to the buy-in you were talking about earlier. Like, how do you create buy-in and get people to want to do that, and get excited to do that? So yeah, that's kind of what we think about with the coaching culture.
In a typical account executive, if I remember correctly at BrookSource, you're going to not only have like your sales manager that you work directly with, but you have these more experienced account executives that are like coaches. They're a specialist across the products and industries. So it's like you're getting access to 3 or 4 people plus what enablement provides to like really, really do your job effectively. So Caitlyn, along the culture piece of this, one of the things that you guys do at Transact that I really like is this, I call it rubbing shoulders. I don't know if you call it something else, but Mitch sort of alluded to it. And Elmer, you have experience with this too, just being on the rep side of things. But I'm curious, Caitlyn, how do you think about the responsibility of the leader or the team lead or the sales managers, or in your case, a VP, in like participating in outbound? Because this is such a key element where I feel like if you don't participate as leaders and it's just like you show an unwillingness that you're not like you're unwilling to do the thing you're asking for reps, it's just buy-in is just not going to be there. But what are your thoughts on that piece?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll take it 2 elements. One, kind of how I'm doing and how my sales leader is doing it as well. We were very fortunate to get to work with Outbound Squad, and I'll gladly plug Outbound Squad all day long because we had so much success with it and genuinely had so much fun working with Jason. But I took that opportunity really, really seriously because we're a small startup. the both financial and the time investment in it was a lot to us. And so I was only going to be willing to go forward with that if my whole team, myself included, was going to commit to being at every single session. And so I think before we even signed a contract with you, Jason, I made you like agree to all the dates we were going to do. And I had every AE and myself put it in our calendars and say, like, we will be there. And so me participating in that training was really important. I come from a background where I wasn't an SDR. And so cold calling is not something that, you know, I did for months or years. I did a lot of self-prospecting as an AE, but not a lot of cold calling. And so it was really important for me to build that skill set and understand, like, put myself in the shoes of the team that I was asking to do some of that outbound. Now, so the training piece was kind of my participation in it. And then we have this thing at Trendset called Power Hours. And this is basically a couple times a week, 2 days a week, everyone's responsible to block an hour in their calendars and do nothing but cold calling. And we have from even the most junior AE who's really, really responsible for self-sourcing their pipeline up to very, very senior AEs that are working big enterprise strategic deals. They all drop everything and they participate in these power hours and they commit to doing it. They share the results at the end of the day. They celebrate meeting set. And I'm still participating in like going in and listening to the recordings. I listen to most of the connects that they made and use it as a coaching opportunity. So from all aspects of the sales team, we're leaning into that and it just keeps everyone accountable.
Yeah. A couple comments on that I think are so important for any sales leaders on the call today is you're participating in the enablement of the reps. Like you're there, you want to be able to speak the language that, in this case, I happen to be training them. It could be Mitch and the internal enablement team training his group. It could be Elmer sitting on a training call from his enablement team or his manager. Like you're participating in that and like doing the exercises with your reps. The other thing that you talked about was power hours. I call them get shit done sessions. Do you guys do this, Mitch, Caitlyn, Elmer? I know Caitlyn, you obviously do. Mitch and Elmer, do you guys do any kind of like, let's get some account executives together and let's get like people doing the activity together, kind of like group workout, you know, style. Do you guys do any of that? We'll start kick it your way, Elmer.
I haven't, but I feel like I'm very self-motivated to just go in
Yeah.
and do it. And I feel like as someone who can be a bit extroverted, I might get distracted if I get some people on with me and we might just start chatting about something else. So I think it works out for me to just do it on my own and knock it out.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good point as a leader too. It's, you know, you're going to have certain reps that, you know, they might be able to just do the activity themselves and hold themselves accountable. And I think having structured blocks where, Caitlyn, correct me if I'm wrong, this is just getting people on a Zoom call and having people put themselves on mute and we're just happen to be on a Zoom call hanging out, making calls together.
We're doing more of a check-in at the start of the hour. Everyone goes
Yeah.
off and does their thing, check-in at the end of the hour. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. I think in the past, they have done it on a Zoom call, but with you know, just kind of the way the world's gone, we've broken it up to async, well, at the same time, but not
Yeah.
on Zoom. But yeah.
I like that because then they can just like Slack each other
Yeah.
or something, message
Yeah.
each other like, oh,
Yeah.
did you deal with this? Have you dealt with this?
Yeah.
I
And
like
it's
that.
so cool to see at the end of the day at the end of the session when the results get shared, like it's a HubSpot report, we just export showing number of calls made by rep, how many connects we had, how many demos were set. It's just really fun to see everyone calls out the top demo setter and the top caller and just like, no matter who it was, it's great camaraderie.
Yeah,
Like, yeah.
making cold calls by yourself sucks. So if you can do it, you can do
Yeah.
it with a team. And I always find too, like whenever we have a training group together or like a team, we're in the market and like we're doing calls together, the results are always better. You know, maybe it's like, you know, people are actually making calls and logging it, but also like there's an energy there. If we look at our data just as a whole versus the data when we do one of these sessions, like it's night and day. You know,
Yeah.
sometimes I see 5-10% pickup, like we're converting more. It's I think there's something to be said for the energy, and then that kind of breeds that culture and creates that buy-in too. So even you can't do that all the time, right? You can't just rely on those, but if that's part of the culture and what you normally do, I think you build confidence too, and you're willing to, you know, to sit there and do it on your own as well.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also just, not on the maybe power hour cold calling side, but Jason, you'll love this. My team, we were having a Slack conversation about like which sequences are working right now and which ones aren't from an email perspective. And one of my AEs said, hey, I'm in the middle of building out this sequence. Anyone want to help? And they just proactively booked a get shit done session together to all hop on a call and jam through building out some sequences. So inspired by Outbound Squad as well. So excited to see that.
I love that. And Robert and Marlon in the chat sort of alluded to, hey, these power hours, hey, let's make sure it's focused on prospecting. And Marlon had mentioned they assembled a SWAT team. I love that. So just getting a team of people together that can just get some shit done and get after it is really big. So I think that's the first. This is such an easy thing to implement. I feel like it's so simple, but the lift will be really high. Is if your team of account executives is not really doing a lot of outbound right now, like schedule a 1 hour get shit done session or power hour per week. Just start with that, and then you as the leader participate in those sessions with them. Elmer, let's kind of shift into, and feel free to give some background on yourself if you feel like that adds more context. Tactically, like as a rep, whether when you were an account executive or as an account manager now, you're doing a lot of outbound, so to speak, in quotes, into your existing accounts. How do you think about blocking and tackling this? So if a manager or a leader is watching this, or another account executive is thinking like, what does this look like throughout the week? How do I spend my Monday through Friday and like make time for this when I'm selling most of the time? How do you think about the time management and like block and tackle piece of the equation?
Yeah, I think time blocking is important. And for background, I was an account executive at ZoomInfo for a year, made it to President's Club, doing a lot of self-sourcing, and now I'm an mid-market account manager. But I think time blocking is super important. As an account executive, you're extremely busy. I was doing like 20 demos a week, so having the time blocks on my calendar, it was super helpful. I think making time to self-source and go through like I was telling you how I go through my closed deads and try to self-source that way, cold calling and sending out emails throughout that time is important as well. And as an account manager, I'm going to time block to like look at the buyer intent data, look at websites and see what kind of customers in my current accounts, my current book are trying to get more product, or maybe a different department has an interest. I'm looking at both of those things.
So if we really zoom into that for a second, because I think this part is important. If you're an account executive and you're just starting to really take self-sourcing very seriously, I think the block and tackle of like what days you should do certain types of activities or times of day you should do certain things, like it's kind of a mystery to people. So can you get tactical with, like, are you doing most of the account selection, let's say, or picking contacts? Is that like a thing that you do on Mondays, for example? You're like, okay, I'm going to pick out my
Yeah.
contacts for the week, and then I'm going to hit a call block first thing Tuesday morning. Like, how do you think about the different types of time blocks? And then how do you think about when you do certain things like finding accounts and contacts versus sending the emails versus making the calls?
Yeah, so the way it used to be at ZoomInfo just a few months back when I was an account executive was you would protect a few accounts. There was a set amount of accounts that you could protect. So on Fridays, I would go through closed deads and see which ones had an interest maybe a month ago, 2 months ago, or maybe the top sales rep let it slip through the cracks. So I'm going to go after it. So I'll go ahead, protect it, action it a little bit, and then I'm going to keep going hard on it throughout the next week. So throughout the next week, I'm going through all those protected accounts that I have, calling them, emailing them, and making it a little bit more focused on as to why they didn't end up closing with us at the end of the day.
So Fridays, you're basically doing the dirty work of planning everyone that you're going to reach out
Mm-hmm.
to in the next week. And I think that this is sort of the equivalent of, if you're trying to make exercise a habit, like make sure that you have the routine and stuff dialed in that you're going to go
Yep.
do at the gym. Make sure you set your clothes out the night before, kind of stuff. It's like remove any obstacle standing in the way of you starting, in this case, picking up the phone or sending the email.
Yeah.
Another thing that you mentioned too that I think is super important that I don't want to gloss over is, as an account executive or account manager or whatever position you are, I think helping prioritize, there's different types of like leads, so to speak. The cold stuff I would put all the way down here, like an account that uh, has never heard of you, It's a net new account. It's not a customer. They've never downloaded anything of yours before. They've never participated in a sales cycle. That's like down here. That's like the coldest outreach that you can do. There's a lot warmer stuff above that, though. You mentioned like working old closed lost deals. And a big part of your strategy, feel free to comment on it from our conversation last time, was hey, I'm going to start with the lowest hanging fruit first. Like, look at my closed lost deals. And is there anything specific that's related to timing or budget? Have we launched a new product since then that I can reach out to? You care to comment at all on kind of how you think about the different tiers of leads and how you might go after some of the low hanging fruit?
Yeah, so as an account executive, I would definitely prioritize the closed deads, especially because you have a quota at the end of each month, right? So you gotta be quick, you gotta be fast, you gotta be tactical. So what I would do is I would create Salesforce reports of anyone that maybe they rejected us due to budgetary reasons, right? Um, Maybe that previous sales rep was holding the price and maybe there was a little bit more wiggle room, or now it's end of quarter and we're getting a little bit more flexible. You know how end of quarters go in sales.
Yep.
So maybe it's perfect timing, put them into a sequence for that. And maybe they said it was bad timing back in December because of budgetary reasons, but in April, the budget opens up and now we're in May, perfect timing to reach back out, right? So I'm focusing on those, especially because we're quick, right? We have monthly quotas, you got to hit these numbers. So I'm focusing on those right at the top, and then I'm going to go cold if I have to. But I think it's going to also be dependent on what company you work at. We obviously get a amount of volume at ZoomInfo. So I was able to do that. Maybe at like a startup, it's going to be a little different.
Sure. So far we've covered culture and creating the culture. We've talked about how to kind of think about your week. I want to shift gears a bit here. Caitlyn, you guys are going, or we're going through this when we were working together. There was like this move into like kind of a different segment and larger companies, if
Yeah.
I am not mistaken.
Yeah.
Nicholas Pepe asked, do you have any tips or trends around what is most effective for generating enterprise pipeline? My
Mm.
assumption is cold calling and mass non-tailored emails don't work. What are your thoughts? So how do you think about the account executive enabling them, training
Yeah.
around the approach if we're trying to do something that's a bit more enterprise?
Yeah. It's actually a very timely question. I was listening to a cold call recording just last night. One of my AEs that I think just crushed this exact thing. They had a closed lost deal with a big organization and they didn't stop. Like they went and found more people using our ZoomInfo tools and our sales nav tools. They went to find the other personas to reach out to, and they were able to take the pain points and the value propositions that resonated with the groups that didn't move forward and really engage in some quality conversations with different people. We see in our industry, I'm sure most people do, big companies, like the different teams are operating in silos. They don't talk to each other. We'll be at conferences and have people come by and say, your solution looks amazing. And we'll say, did you know you're a customer? And they have no idea. So just like really not stopping at the individual or the small group of individuals that you connected with first, and like prospecting each group as if they're their own entity, and taking those findings that you get from each engagement. Because when you can pick up the phone and they say hi, and you can say, hi, I know your company is dealing with X, Y, and Z, and like that's not really public information, they're definitely listening. So that's kind of my tip there.
But Mitch?
What's that, Jason?
Oh, I saw you take yourself off mute. I thought you were going to say something.
Well, I was gonna say, like, I totally agree with that. And we've
Yeah.
worked with you, Jason. That was like a big shift for us, like going from you get someone on the phone and you kind of have your value prop to you get someone on the phone and a couple of things that this persona really cares about. Like that was the big shift for us when we kind of felt like our approach, our framework had gotten a little dusty. And I think going back to buy-in and like getting people excited to get back on the phones, like that helped us tremendously too. Cause it's like, I actually have value, like I'm coming in as more of a consulting approach than I'm jamming this canned pitch down your throat. So that was big for us too. Second, everything Caitlyn said.
Yeah, well, let's dig into that a little bit, Mitch. From an enablement side, what I want to focus on here is like the enablement piece, like the pieces of the puzzle that are needed for self-sourcing. I always think of outbound in kind of a couple different buckets, right? There's the targeting piece of, do I have really a clear criteria that as a rep, I know what opportunities to pursue, which accounts are going to be good. I might use intent data. I might look for closed loss deals. I might look for industry, size of the company, etc. Messaging. So like the what do I say? And then, talk track. So I know what to say over the phone. Some sample sequencing and messaging. So I know what to say via email, etc. What are kind of the building blocks when you're thinking about, here's what we owe the reps as a sales org, here are the things that we need to provide to the account executives so that they're properly enabled?
Yeah. A couple things come to mind. One of it, in terms of like the talk track, I mean, I think, and we worked with you on this, like we like to have a framework, but then there's creativity within the framework. So we don't have a lot of success with like, say this, but hey, here's the framework and here's a couple of ideas or some bullets on, what could those priorities be that you're bringing up. So for us, it is the strategy, like a general framework that, and I think what's key for that is if you want to be able to coach it, we talked about the get shit done sessions, getting leaders involved, the accountability, like you have to have something that's standardized in my opinion, but then allows for creativity so that reps actually want to do it and they can put their own flair on it, right? They're not going to be successful if it's canned and if it's somebody else's voice. So I think that's a building block. And then, I mean, just giving them, for us, like the coaching is also helping them. We talked about this earlier, like who should I be calling, Because I think that's where a lot of people can get frustrated and go wrong too, is they've just got this giant list, but there's no strategy there. There's no accountability, if you're have a bad month or something, to how do you get back on track. So it's that coaching cycle of like our coaches are involved with making sure we're going out after the right people. We have the right strategy in place. So it's kind of your macro, like your guardrails for who I should be calling. What are the accounts? What are the people? What's our strategy there? And then I've got like the actual the framework and like how do I actually execute that on the phones in place too. So that's kind of how I think about it.
How do you think about the enablement for the leaders?
Yeah. A lot of what we do, I feel like it can be similar, like especially if we're talking cold calls or emails, like it's similar, but we lead with them. They got to learn it first and understand it if we want to then have a successful rollout with the team. So we did that when we brought you in. It's making sure that the leaders feel really comfortable about what we're doing. And then there's that added piece of, how do you coach it? How do you create the culture in your local market or with your actual team? And that gets into, some of the get shit done sessions and some of that. But some of it's the same, like they need to know the X's and O's. And then of course, the sales manager has to do it all, right? They got to be able to execute it. And they need to be able to understand, how to coach it and how to look at the data and steer reps as well. So, but we spend a lot of time in that area because to me, that's the biggest lever we've got. Like if they're not comfortable with it or they don't know how to execute the plan, then it kind of falls apart from there.
Yeah. I got another tactical question here before we shift gears for you, Elmer. Patrick Devaney asks, any thoughts, best practices for keeping track of top accounts and low-hanging fruit accounts that you want to target? I'm in a pure acquisition role and really find myself living between notes and Salesforce, outreach, email, Google Docs, handwritten notes. It can become overwhelming and a lot falls through the cracks. So how do you think about keeping track of stuff? What's your system?
Yeah. So as an account executive, I would use Salesforce's Grid Buddy, and I would keep all my notes in there. If you guys haven't heard of Grid Buddy, you should check it out. I don't know if everyone has access to it, but as Minfo, that's what we had access to, and you can basically prioritize your pipeline on there of like which one's as close to getting closed. There's different options. There was 4 different stages, and I can't remember the name of the stages right now. One of them was like still prospecting, and one of them's like closing, another one's like you're in the middle of the stage or whatever like that, something like that. That's how I would organize it that way and keep track of everything that would be going on. And I'd always, anytime I meet with that specific account, I'm leaving a note of what's happening. And I'm also putting another separate note of next steps. What do I need to do? Do I need to send them a value send of going against a competitor, right? Do I need to send them more aggressive pricing? Is the timing off and do I need to circle back another time, right? As an account manager, now I'm using Copilot AI. So huge shout out to ZoomInfo. So I'll put my top target accounts because I have a set of accounts now. As an account executive, I did not. I put those top target accounts in Copilot, and then I'm able to see what's happening internally within those companies. Have they been on our website? Have they been clicking on buyer intent, topics that relate to us, or maybe someone moved from one company to another, et cetera.
Got it. So that's Grid Buddy for those of you in the chat that were asking. I dropped a link to it. So that's kind of cool. It sounds like an easier way within Salesforce to just kind of keep track and
Yep.
and of all that kind of stuff. Because that's when I work with teams and people are doing stuff in spreadsheets because they can't get the CRM to do what they're doing. It's just like it's really hard. And then like when that rep leaves, where do you take off? Where do you pick up where they left off? All of that kind of stuff. So hopefully that helps you. So that's how we keep the accounts organized. I got a couple more questions here, and then we're going to shift into the one-on-one portion of it. I thought we'd do a little bit of Q&A. So one of the questions here that I thought was really good, and I'll just kind of open it up to you three. Anna Claudia Hartwick asks, what are your top suggestions for AEs transitioning from fully remote environment, meetings, work setup, et cetera, to in-person environment and client face-to-face meetings? I mean, I know, Mitch, you guys do a lot of face-to-face.
We do.
So we might start with you here. For someone that's like used to doing what we're doing right now on a Zoom call, and then now having to meet face to face, what are your suggestions in terms of like not only just making that adjustment, but there's a huge time management component to that now of, there's drive time, there's fly time, like fitting in my outbound outside of that can be pretty tough. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, on that last point you made, yes, you do have to be much more organized with your time. I think even your tool set becomes important there. Like we spend a lot of time figuring out how we can be efficient on site at a customer and how can we still get work done there even if we're not at the office. So I think time management is huge. I also think just to go back to more of like an outbound lens, we talked about low-hanging fruit. Like I think the messaging strategy can be a lot different there too. I mean, we do a lot in our local communities. Like we invest a lot in community give back, and we have a lot of client interaction through that. Like what are my accounts involved in, meeting them at and kind of seeing where our company's interests align there. I think it introduces the opportunity for a lot of creativity, like a lot of our reps, sometimes we don't want to overthink it. It's like, hey, we're in the same market. We're down the street, whatever it might be. Could I bring you a coffee? Could I buy your team breakfast? Like we set a lot of meetings off just really, really easy, low hanging fruit messaging, and we don't need to be overthinking like our value prop and this and that. So, we do a lot. We do have a lot of like tricks and plays we run that involve getting on site and being on the client site. And it generates a lot of activity, and the reps love it too. I mean, it's more fun, I think.
I am super passionate about this topic. Can I jump in? This is in-person meetings is like, I'm so sad the world has gone the way it is because I think in-person meetings are where it's at. And I'm doing a push with my team to figure out like, how do we get off our computers and off of our Zooms and seeing our customers? So like, first of all, you can keep your prospecting going with sequences. Set up your sequences for when you're traveling and let the automation do its part. Obviously, you may not be cold calling as much, but you don't let your stats drop. I come from a world when I was in AE, and what I want to get back to is city tours. And so we'd pick a city where you have at least one like anchor customer or a prospect that you're already engaged with, like you're going to get a meeting, and you commit to having that meeting with that prospect. And then you use your tools, whether it's Zoom Info, whether it's Sales Nav, and you find all of your prospects that are in that city, and you reach out to them and you say, I'm going to be down the street. Even if you're 20 minutes away, I'm going to be down the street, next Tuesday. Can I stop by? Especially if it's someone you've had a little bit of engagement with. This is going to work great for close loss deals. It works good for obviously just getting to know your customers. We were talking about prospecting enterprise deals. I'd love to meet somebody in XYZ department, like who you've never spoken to before. It's such a powerful way to do it. And I also just the industry I was in a million years ago, when I was doing a lot of in-person stuff, like people love donuts, like literally bring them food and people will meet with you for donuts. It's pretty fun. And the information you get, the transparency you get, the rapport you build by sitting in person with somebody exceeds screen time every time, in my opinion.
So as someone who's only sold remotely, my what I'm thinking is, does it actually make a difference for you to go meet them in person rather than, hey, let me just call them and see if the timing is right? You know, because wouldn't you get the same answer either way? The result's going to be the same.
Yeah. In my experience, it's very different. So I can give like a very concrete example of I still work deals myself, and of a deal that I was working with a big enterprise customer. We were hitting some walls, and we were really struggling to kind of like get to the next stage with them. And this was a company that had believe it or not, a no cameras policy for Zoom. So we were just talking to people with no ability to like see who they were or really interact with them in like a facial recognition way. And I sat down, I flew to Houston. I sat down with them for an hour. They brought in 5 people I had never met before, and they gave me more information than I could have ever, that I'd been working with them for 6 months. They gave me more information about their buying process, what their needs are, their pain point, who we were up against, their timeline, their budget process. Just by being there in person, like walls just come down and people aren't distracted. Like I'm sure half the people on the webinar right now are checking their email and checking their Slack while they're on the Zoom. In person, you're not doing that. It's rude. You know, you are talking to the person that's in front of you. So that's my opinion based on my experience.
Yeah, Michael already got to it in the chat. To be honest, I'm multitasking right now. Like getting in that person's office or even just on site, like where they get coffee at their workplace, just such a different, because we're huge on the relationship. And I think everybody is in sales, but it's so much harder to build that rapport. Or, you know, I'm in their office and they've got the picture of their family behind them or their favorite sport. Like there's so many advantages to being in that intimate setting for sure.
I can think of 2 deals specifically where I sold back in the day, where I walked out of the meeting, not like it was a good meeting, but I don't really know what we're doing next. And at the elevator, I was like, we got it. Like they said one thing as they were saying bye to me as I got into the elevator, that it was like, great, we don't need to discount this one. Like really important information.
How much
Yeah,
time do you think that's taking though? Do you think that elongates the sales process?
Um, I think it depends what your sales process is. If you're used to selling something in a week and it's going to take you 2 weeks or 3 weeks to get to that city to meet with them, of course that could. If you're selling an enterprise deal that's going to take 3 to 6 months anyway, I think it can actually expedite it by getting in front of them and building those relationships and breaking down some barriers.
if you're selling deals that are 6 figures plus, like this totally makes sense to not do as a first meeting necessarily, but when you started to build a good champion and they can get people to show up to a meeting in person, I mean, it's a huge difference maker. It's not going to work if you're selling something that's high volume and transactional. There's not as much of a need.
True.
You guys, we got to shift gears. This is really good topic. So we're going to shift into the one-on-one portion of the call today. So Caitlyn, Elmer, you two are going to hop off. Thank you for your time. If you guys could give them a little love in the chat before they hop off, and then we're going
Thank
to
you.
continue with Mitch here.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Cool.
everyone.
Thanks, you two. Okay, so Mitch, what I thought would be really good to do here for this one-on-one portion. So what I want to do here for everyone else that's watching is we're going to do like a deep dive with Mitch. And I think some of the unique things about what they do, and we want to help kind of answer some questions for you guys, is again, they have close to 200 account executives and 0 SDRs. Every account executive is responsible for self-sourcing their own pipeline. And dare I say, in working with you guys, they're pretty enthusiastic about it. The leaders are pretty enthusiastic about it as well, and the culture is just really, really good. So with that context, let us know in the chat, what questions do you have specifically for Mitch, knowing that he's been a rep, he's been a sales leader, he's in an enablement role right now. He's heading up the enablement team. A big part of their business is sourced through these self-sourcing methods. Let us know if you guys have any questions. Drop them in the Q&A. You guys can also vote on the questions too, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Mitch, I thought it would be good to just kind of tag on the in-person thing that we were talking about before. Yeah. How do you guys coach, and maybe to step back a little bit, a big part of what I've noticed in working with you guys is you're extremely numbers and metrics driven, more so than any sales organization that I've worked with. Do you want to kind of step back and talk about what are the numbers that you guys measure and maybe why? And then we can dig into, because I know one of the metrics that you track is like these relationship building meetings, right? These in-person meetings. So start with the metrics. How do you guys think about the numbers and like measurement component of like the self-sourcing equation?
Yeah, first of all, I was so happy when you said that because we're always looking at our numbers and like, man, how can we do this better? Like, should we be looking at different stuff? So when you said that, I was like, okay, we're doing okay. That's good. Yeah, it's not complex, but I mean, for starters, we look at pretty basic stuff. I mean, we look at output, like what's the effort level basically that the reps are putting out there, calls, emails, social. We can see obviously the output, total output, and then like what are they doing in those different channels. So it's very easy to see if you've got a rep that might have a reluctance to hit the phones. Maybe they're spending all their time on LinkedIn or email. So we look at that. And that's, like I said, like mostly an effort thing, right? It's we have like a goal there, but the main thing is all about actually setting meetings. So we look at meetings, and whether you're a new rep or a tenured rep, I mean, there's different goals for different reps and where they're at, but we do look at who are those new relationships you're building. So, net new opportunities, new customers, and then we have relationship type meetings. So think, and again, we have this market approach where we have different markets and boots on the ground. But are we getting out to lunches and coffees? Are we, we call them out of offices, but like, are we actually getting to maybe a volunteering opportunity or a baseball game or a concert or whatever? So we look at a lot of different things, and then we have kind of the coaching infrastructure in place and this accountability model to keep an eye on that. And I think the other big important piece of it is like explaining the why. Like, I think we do a pretty good job of explaining to the reps why they're there. They're not just targets to hit targets or just a number we pulled out of a hat. It's a very purposeful model that's been built off of like these results grow reps. They create career income. Like, they get you to the next level. They outpace our competition. So explaining the why is something I think we do a good job of early when they enter the role.
So there's outbound activity. There's meetings created from that. And do you guys separate net new meetings versus a meeting within an existing customer account?
We do. Yeah, because we want to see both. You want to see it all. So obviously you have reps at different places. You have somebody calling on a cold account and maybe doesn't have as many opportunities in their funnel. They're going to have a lot of, net new meetings. And then we're really focused on converting those into second and third touches. And then you've got your really tenured reps who are managing our biggest accounts, and they're going to be swimming in opportunities and these relationships, but you have to make sure that they're continuing to grow and find new pockets of the organization that are customers or a new customer as well. So that's kind of where the coaches come in to help personalize that.
Got it. And then the other piece is relationship meetings. So you're tracking the number of in-person meetings that a rep does. Okay.
Yeah.
So if we kind of backtrack a bit, so I think this is one of the big things that if anyone here is an enablement or sales leader, hey, we're prioritizing outbound for the first time, let's say, or maybe we're struggling to do it, and we want to think about the activity target. I think one of the worst mistakes you can make is just pull a number out of, your what, and say, hey, you need to do 30 activities per day. And there's like no rhyme or reason behind the activity. Do you want to talk more about like the numbers? Is this a number that like, hey, here's a standard starting place for how many activities, meetings you should set, relationship meetings you should set, et cetera. And then do you help kind of customize it over time for the rep based on their conversions? Can you talk more about this piece? Because I feel like this is glossed over a ton.
Yeah, it is. So we kind of have some different models. You've got a brand new AE who's coming in, is going to be really focused on like net new relationships and identifying opportunities. You have that person kind of heavier on the outreach. It's going to require more calls, more emails to kind of get the flywheel turning, if you will. And then they're really focused on kind of those new meetings. Then as you grow and you get more tenured reps who are in it for longer, then that's where you're going to want to really ramp up those relational meetings. Like, are we getting them off site? Are we building relationships? Are we having meetings more about specific opportunities? And then, on the side, still making sure that they're not going all in on those relationships. They're also trying to find some new pockets and using referrals and things to get to different pockets of accounts that they're working with. So that's kind of the starting point on it. Yeah.
Yeah, and is this something that their sales manager, this is like a weekly conversation for them?
Yeah, so with our sales managers, they do weekly one-on-ones on Mondays with all the reps. And I'll say, like, some of the metrics, they take time, but we look at it weekly. So like a manager is going to be able to easily see if they had a really low output week. And it's not like a constant stick. It's just like, hey, what happened last week? So there's visibility there. And then when you get into more of the longer term, especially when you're talking about meetings, right? Like meetings are going to fluctuate based off a lot of different factors. But when you start looking at months and quarters, we have some triggers in place where it's like, hey, this rep's in the yellow or they're in the red, and it's really easy for our coaches to identify, hey, they're having trouble setting meetings, or they're having trouble converting those meetings into more relational type meetings. So we have kind of triggers in place there that can make it really easy on the coaches to just like, hey, when this happens, this is what I'm going to do. And the reps understand that too. So those triggers are kind of built in, and it's just part of the process. So I think it helps enforce it.
Yeah. I know it's such a basic question, but I find that so many companies, the way they've set up things for the account executives, they don't even have a way to really truly measure what the outbound activity looks like. And if, what gets measured gets made is the is the old saying. Another idea I have, another one of my clients does this is in order to receive inbound leads, you have to self-source a certain number of meetings on a monthly basis. So you get taken off of the inbound rotation if you're not self-sourcing meetings through outbound, which I happen to love. Brandon Lee asks, what's the best place to get started once you receive your account list? He had mentioned, hey, closed lost deals, renewals, these are kind of great places to look. And this will sort of answer, I think, Anna's question as well, who asked any big advice to engage and build a new pipeline from an AE perspective when transitioning to a new company. How do you guys provide guidance for a new BrickSource account executive who's starting from zero, no contacts, nothing like that?
Yeah.
What guidance do you give them in the first 2-3 months to build pipeline and how to kind of think about territory and how they plan all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So like when we have brand new reps coming through, starting on fresh territories, a lot of times those are like our colder accounts. We have a quarterly coaching cycle that all reps do, but it's particularly important for the new reps. So we have something in Salesforce that we create, like our account game plans, and it's really meant to figure out like, what's our play with this account? Why are we relevant? Why could we be relevant to this account? What's our targeting strategy? Who are we going after? What's our messaging look like there? And really drills down to very tactical, things that get into like the actual outreach tools we're using, what's our sequences that we're using, for example. So we start that right out of the gates with a new rep. And that's where, again, the coaches and the investment in the coaches comes up big, because those new reps, a lot of times they don't know where to start. They need some help. So that's where, like, bringing in some of those specialists we have, whether it's the industry specialist or this person sells this particular technology area really well. They can kind of come in and say, hey, these are the 3 practice areas where we do a lot of business. Let's go after these targets at this account with this messaging. And it's going to be something that's should hit home, because we've gotten good feedback from that on other accounts.
I sort of briefly mentioned this earlier. Because I feel like you guys do, this is so unique. I haven't seen this in any SaaS companies that I work with. Can you walk through like how the organization is structured? So like for a typical account executive, like they have their frontline leader, but there's a support system there that is really interesting and very intentional that I think is really big behind your guys' success. You guys have really high retention too with your account executives. Can you talk a little bit more about like kind of how the structure looks like? What does the support look like for the account executive?
Yeah, and I'll provide some context too for maybe why it's this way. And we've talked about this, Jason. Like one of our challenges when we're talking about like talk tracks or personas that we're going after is that we do call on a very wide area. So we're calling on technology and engineering leaders, and we call on a lot of different industries. So what we've done over time is we've identified those industries that really fit well and that we've had a lot of success in, and we've invested in people, basically our top performers from the AE seat, who are looking to grow into that next role. Maybe they're not a sales manager, but they're a really good sales rep. And we put them in roles like vertical managers or national account managers, and they become SMEs on their specific, you know, vertical area, or again, like a technology area. So what our reps have access to is their sales manager who's in the market with them. They're coaching them, and their lane is really the fundamentals, the weekly accountability. But then they have access to these specialists who are like your messaging gurus and you know, people who really know the customer really well. So it's kind of this hybrid, and it can create challenges. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. You kind of have two coaches, but it certainly provides a lot of value too.
So those specialists, they carry a bag still, right? They have a quota. They're still selling deals, but part of what they're being compensated for now is essentially mentoring.
Yeah, and growing that portfolio of accounts, you know, that
Yeah.
they've kind of got within their vertical that are in that industry or in that technology area. Yeah.
I think this is such a big piece of it because it's like as you grow the sales organ, if you have an enterprise or strat, you know, sales motion, this is a great way to build up those like mid-market reps and SMB reps to where they are able to kind of land and expand and work with the more seasoned reps to grow the account.
Yeah.
Kristen asks, as an AE, how do you think about high volume, lots of activity versus strategic prospecting and high personalization? Does most of what you guys do fit into the more strategic side, or is there a more transactional side of BerkSource?
Yeah, like when I started, when I was selling for the company, we didn't have as much of a focused approach. So like I think Elmer mentioned earlier, like, you know, you got 100 counts you're calling on. I know that's really common in maybe tech and SaaS sales. For me, it was like you've got the Northwest corridor of Columbus, Ohio, which was super overwhelming.
Yeah.
And so we've gotten much more focused there. So this helps a lot when you're trying to come up with a messaging strategy and trying to keep a rep really focused. But like the majority of our reps call on, you know, no more than 5 accounts. Some of them are all in on one particular enterprise account. So I think that focus can really help there.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of, you know, what I was taught was this concept of you don't want your sales pipeline to look like a pipeline, you want it to look like a martini glass. And it
Yeah.
was like go narrow and then go deep versus spreading yourself out across a bunch. So yeah, with your enterprise motion, that's going to be the biggest difference is same volume, just
Mm.
concentrated really heavily within an existing account where there might be multiple business units, let's say.
Yeah. And
Then you
back
can,
to like self-sourcing too. I mean, if your focus is not quite as wide, you know, let's just say you're the person who's calling on those 5 accounts or within the specific industry and you're very focused, like you know that you're going to be able to set those meetings with your knowledge much easier than, you know, maybe a brand new rep who doesn't have that specialized knowledge or like a BDR. So I think it helps from an efficiency standpoint to like lean on that expertise in that person. And if they, you know, if they know they can go out and set meetings and build pipeline themselves, it kind of contributes to that self-source strategy.
so I got a couple more questions for you just on the model. James says, I'm curious if the decision to skip SDRs was more out of necessity. Many companies feel they are crucial for the separation. Just wondering, why have you guys chosen to, and you're not in SaaS, you sell professional services, which,
Yeah.
I mean, it's different. It's not that much different necessarily. You're selling into some very similar buyers that anyone selling an IT or security solution might be selling into. But this decision to not have SDRs, where does that come from?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was thinking about that before the webinar. I mean, I think part of it was kind of ingrained in the culture from day one. Like it's definitely like this scrappy, gritty culture. So part of it is just like, you know, we bring in people pretty early out of career. A lot of times those people start on like the delivery side of our business, which is like, you know, we're a staffing and consulting company. So it's like actually finding the talent. So it's not sales, but it's kind of this BDR-esque role. So we do have people who start in that function and then move into sales. And it's kind of just this, I think that startup mentality that's kind of grown from day one and continues to grow. And we have had to, we've certainly talked about it and looked at it, but I think we've still decided that with our very narrow, focused account strategy, like we think the best people to be able to continue to generate that pipeline and do it effectively. Jason, we've talked a million times about how hard it is out there to get
Yeah.
these meetings set. Like we need our top people with that knowledge to us to be able to set that. And it, you know, so I think that's the other reason why we haven't gone with the BDR model. We think this gives us the best chance to like set more meetings and generate more pipeline with those reps who have the knowledge.
Yeah, especially with these big enterprise deals that you're selling where you want to get a hold of a VP of IT or some senior executive. It's like the first impression on the prospect. Why wouldn't you want that to be with someone that's very seasoned
Yeah.
and really understands the sales cycle, especially?
Yep.
Dude, this is great. It's great having you on, man. Where can people go to learn more about you, Brooksource? Let us know. Are you guys hiring? Like, it's a great company. I've worked with them quite a bit. I spoke at your guys' SKO last year. Like, great company culture, very fun. A lot of the reps are like the younger ones are hired, I think, first or second job out of college. There's just a lot of great, and then there's people that have been there for 10, 15 plus 20 years, I would imagine, and everywhere in between. So great culture. Where can people go to learn more about like Brooksource? Are you guys hiring? All of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, man. I mean, just to learn about the company, website's brooksource.com. But yeah, if you're interested in just learning more, or, any of the questions we didn't get to, I'd say LinkedIn. Feel free to hit me up there and kind of look into it.
Yeah. And are you guys hiring right now at all?
We've done a little bit this year. It's been, I mean, like everyone, like it's been a little bit slower. So our hiring pace has gone down a bit. But we've got some planned for back half of the year. So yeah, if you're interested, definitely reach out to me. See if we can get you connected, see where you're at in the world. We have like that, again, that hybrid approach. So we got people in office a couple days a week and then some remote work as well. So depending on where you're at, yeah, definitely reach out on LinkedIn. Love to hear from people.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, Mitch. Thank you, everyone else, for spending time with us today. Hopefully, the content was valuable for you. We're doing these every other Wednesday, and we got some really cool topics coming up. One on displacing competition. So, if you're finding yourself in an industry where everyone you reach out to is already using a competitor, that's one that we got coming up. So, make sure to keep your eyes out for that. That's all I got for you guys today. Mitch, good to jam with you, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everybody.
Cool.
Have a
All right,
good one.
everyone. See ya. Have a good one.